You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to Stop laughing.
Episode 38 of Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong.
I am Jessica Szilagyi, your host this week.
I'm Matt.
Dave Roberts is out of town, and it's not your turn to talk yet, Matt. Dave Roberts is out of town, and we desperately miss him. We can barely even get started. But I'm here this week with Matt Lowe.
What's up? Out of
And
town,
we are-
he's out of the country.
Out of the country.
Out?
Luckily, he will be back before this drops, so you can't rob his house. But we are going to be doing election night reporting, kind of running down the races and talking about our predictions, how wrong most of us were on just about everything, and where we see the state going from here. So, Matt, overall, without getting into the nitty-gritty of each race, what did you think of election night as a whole?
It's about what I expected it would be, really. Like, overall, I kind of figured that if things were close, that you were just going to see all the nonsense that we're seeing.
Were you surprised that we went to bed not knowing? Not we collectively, like we as Georgians.
Right. I think so, because I was watching it, and I was watching the website there from the Secretary of State, and when I was like, all right, I'm going to bed because I think Kemp's probably got this wrapped up, it was like 53, nearly 54, 46, low 47, right? And I was like, yeah, we're done. It's, we're 80, 85% reporting, whatever it was. And in the time that it took me to, shut down all the lights, lock the doors, just do my nightly routine, make sure everything's squared away, get to the bedroom and get in the bed. And when I laid down, I refreshed the screen one more time, and it was like 50.49 and 48, 0.7 or whatever it was. I was like, holy crap, something just happened. And that's when I knew that it was going to be a very long, drawn-out process.
I agree. I was optimistic because Kemp was never behind. I don't think he ever even dropped below 50%. The margins obviously narrowed as Metro Atlanta and Savannah and Columbus and stuff came in, but he did hold the lead, unlike some of the other races where, like with Karen Handel and Brad Raffensperger in Secretary of State's race, they were kind of shifting back and forth and dropping below 50% and going back up, and it wasn't really clear what was going on. Kemp kind of always had the lead. Which gave me hope, because before the election results started coming in, I kind of had a weird feeling that maybe Abrams was going to perform better than she did, or maybe even lead going into a runoff. I think I was surprised at how poorly Ted Metz did. He underperformed against all of the Libertarian candidates.
Right.
He didn't even
By
get
nearly
1%.
a third.
Right. And that's usually, I know that they always do best in Public Service Commission because people are like, I don't know what this is. I'll just vote for the Libertarian, which is great. But I was just, with the momentum that he got right there at the end, I was a little bit surprised. But then when you started looking at numbers in rural Georgia, and especially down where I am, he barely got 1% in most places because people were like, oh, was a Libertarian? Oh, my Lord.
Right. Well, but see, no, I don't know, man. You think about it, Ted, he wasn't an exciting candidate, because you got guys like me who, man, I voted third party for years now, and I didn't vote for Ted. It just wasn't I don't know, like, I was talking about it today with somebody. They were talking about the Libertarian candidates and why it is that they seem to never perform much past 2 or 3%. And like I made the statement that I think what they need to do, a Libertarian candidate for governor anyway, they need to run someone who actually cares about winning, that isn't there to spread a message, understands that there needs to be more to the platform than weed, and has that charisma that a politician has.
I agree with what you're saying. I don't want to interrupt, but I will say I want to say one thing before you go on. The difference is that when you have Libertarian candidates with Andrew Hunt and Nathan Deal, people voted for Andrew Hunt because they didn't like Nathan Deal and they were never on Team Deal. Kemp had a different type of momentum throughout the entire primary where he really had a stronghold, and I think some people who would have voted third party stuck with him because he was, whether it was because they really liked his message against Cagle, or they pledged their support back then and they were all in, or they just really hated Abrams. Like, it was a totally different dynamic across the board this time.
Right. I would agree with that. I would like to see the Libertarian Party. What I'd like to see is a guy with the resume of Andrew Hunt and the conviction of Doug Craig. Like that guy I think
he didn't waver. Doug does not waver.
No, he doesn't. But Andrew was, he was he had the resume for it.
I think something that hurt Ted too is that he's a former Republican. And while, I'm a former Republican too, but it's hard to tell people why you were involved in the Republican Party initially and then tell them that you left. Like that's just such a, I don't know. People are just so close-minded right now. It's just like Sarah Riggs Amico. She was a Republican and now she's a Democrat. Once you say I was a Republican, they stop listening. So, and not that all votes come from the Republican side, but I just feel like they turned off their listening ears when they heard things like that. And my biggest hope out of this is that, especially as they went down the ballot, like Ryan Graham and Smythe Duval, I really, really enjoyed getting to know them and hearing their message for liberty. And Ted has been involved in politics for a while, but the trend is that you run as a Libertarian and then you leave and we never hear from you again. And I'm just really hopeful that the candidates who are on the ballot this time will stay involved and stay committed to the message and keep promoting the message, because, Smythe is why we have a runoff in the Secretary of State's office. Like, he clearly had an impact in an office, like, that matters.
Right.
And that was a messaging thing. So clearly there's something to that.
Right. Now, I will say that about Ted is this is the second statewide race that I know of that he's run. He ran insurance commissioner a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. So at least he's consistently out there.
True. He is. He's very involved. But, 37,000 votes. 1%, that's still, I've never gotten 37,000 people to do anything for me. So, right. That's still amazing. Right. But when you look at the numbers next to 1.9, it's kind of deflating. And it's why the whole narrative of Libertarians can't win anything. They can't even get this many votes. Every time they move the marker, if they get 99,000, it's, well, they couldn't even get 100,000 votes. And This time I'm sure you can't even get 40,000 votes. But like I said, I've never gotten 37,000 people to do anything for me. So congrats on your 37,000 votes, Ted.
Right.
Congrats. From all of us that let me tell you why you're wrong. We salute you, because that's a big deal. The lieutenant governor's race turned out exactly how I thought. It ended up being, the final numbers were 51.74% for Duncan, 48.2% for Amico. There was only about 160,000 vote drop off overall for the race, between the governor's race and lieutenant governor's race. And
right, I always find that interesting.
Well, with Cagle, there was always a minimum of 100,000 Republican drop-offs. Here, only 30,000 people, not even, about 25,000 people dropped off. My math stinks. It's not 30. It is 30,000 between Kemp and Duncan. But almost 100,000 people didn't vote for Amico after voting for Abrams, which I thought was crazy because I really thought this whole blue wave thing was like come in and see it through, finish the drill.
Well, do you think that has anything to do with race? Like, do you think that 100,000 are people that showed up to vote for a black female and just didn't give a damn after that?
I think sometimes that has to do with like GOTV efforts and who you tell them like you got to go vote for Abrams, and then they're like I don't know what to do after that. Voters are lazy, and it was a long ballot. Like you had to click through a lot of pages, and for those of us who are super active, that's not a big deal, but for those who aren't. But then if you go down one more race as Secretary of State, it ticked back up for Barrow. So Barrow got
right, almost 60,000.
Yeah, more than Amico, and only maybe 25,000 less than Abrams.
Right.
So it doesn't really make sense. Maybe Democrats are more reasonable than Republicans. If they don't know the person, they skip it. But the whole thing is crazy to me because Raffensperger got more or less votes than Duncan and fewer votes than Kemp. And then Chris Carr ticked back up. Gary Black got more votes than anyone. He's the only statewide candidate who topped 2 million.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, that's not true. He's not the only candidate. State school superintendent did, and so did Commissioner of Labor, Mark Butler. But still, the fact that the highest turnout started to go as you went down the ballot was a surprising trend as well.
Right.
And for Gary Black, no less. Like, come on, folks, get it together.
Maybe that's those libertarian voters went, well, we'll vote. I don't know. Do you think that whole, I don't know, the last 2 weeks of Sarah Riggs running around talking about Kemp getting tossed out of office on a sex thing hurt her?
The only reason I say no is because I found out later on after that whole thing happened that she had been saying that all along since back in June. So that was like a pillar of her platform. And so I feel like if it was going to have an effect, like it would have. It's just that's when people started hearing about it. I just don't feel strongly that that's what it was. But, we'll never really know. I mean, we don't know why voters do anything. You could ask them what the hell were they thinking on half this stuff. But here we are. I've been clear that I'm not really a Brad Raffensperger supporter. I don't really find his campaign platform exciting or even worthy of a vote. But what was interesting was that when the Kemp quote, I guess, victory was in question, I think that would have fared better for Raffensperger if people had to turn back out in 3.5-4 weeks for Raffensperger if Kemp was at the ticket. But now that it's just Raffensperger and a public service commissioner, I think that John Barrow has like a tremendously greater chance of winning.
Right, yeah, because there's going to be 8 people that show up for that.
Right. So. And this race was so close. I mean, 49.2% for Raffensperger and 48.57% for Barrow, with less than 30,000 votes separating them.
Right.
and you totally can blame the Libertarian in this case because he got 86,000, Smythe Duval, but I mean, people were already blaming him, saying you took his votes, but as a reminder, the only reason there's a runoff is because nobody got the votes to have the victory, not because anyone took them from someone else. Just a reminder.
Right?
But yeah, so I'm excited. Barrow's our only choice to shake up this Republican stronghold on our state. As a former Republican and as a Libertarian, I was super disappointed by the number of people who just, I guess, like, overcommitted what Democrats were going to do. I don't want Republicans to have every office and the legislature and the governor's office. I don't want that. I want some diversity. I want some gridlock, and Barrow is our only choice, our only hope, and it's not really in a position that can...
Right. Not create a whole lot of gridlock. Yeah, I don't know, man. What does... I don't know, I guess I've never paid attention to what the Secretary of State does outside of elections.
They're in charge of all the licensing, and they oversee the boards and streamline all of that. But the reason that I was a John Barrow supporter for it was because he was such a good constituent services guy when he was a congressman. And when you think about the Secretary of State's office and the business owners and the people who are in business who have to deal with, I guess, like licensing and all of that and fees for their business, that's constituent services. That's interaction with the public. By and large, it is the most interaction with the public out of any of these constitutional offices.
Right.
So,
yeah, I've been interacting quite a bit with the Secretary of State's office. Here.
Have you?
Yeah, a couple of LLCs that I've formed as of late, and apparently the names are too close to other existing names, and then I go look, and they're like they've been dissolved. So
yeah, I've never understood
I'm like,
that.
Why the hell does it matter?
Right. If they're not there anymore, then they're never coming back.
Right.
I think that the Attorney General's race between Chris Carr and Charlie Bailey was kind of surprising. In a good way, it was 51-48 basically percentage, and they only were separated by 110,000 votes, which seems like a lot. But then when you remember that Chris Carr was appointed by the governor and he's never run an election or statewide election or any election for that matter, and he doesn't have, like, all he had was an eye. He doesn't really have any other experience.
Right.
The Democrat, I think, performed fairly well. And from what I heard, there was a lot of crossover, but from Republicans to Charlie Bailey. But
I crossed over.
As did I.
Because, and here's the thing, I wouldn't know who Charlie Bailey was if he walked in here and kicked me in the shins, unless he was wearing a name tag. I straight up voted for him because he wasn't Chris Carr.
It was a protest vote?
Absolutely. I like it, in dealing with the Attorney General's office in some open records request issues, like just their flat out refusal to do their job. It just irritated me. So
I have to agree, and I'm dealing with Chris Carr's office again right now where they're not enforced. They've admitted that local government has violated the law and they're in the process of punishing them, but I think they slowed it up for the election because they gave them like an extra 15 days to respond. And I was kind of gauging my vote on whether or not they were going to enforce the law, and they didn't, so I voted for Charlie Bailey. Like, I was going to give him the benefit of the doubt if they actually came down with the hammer this time, but he didn't, and so he totally lost my vote. And I also have a policy that I won't vote for someone who's been appointed because they didn't earn it.
Right.
And they did a political favor to get where they are, and that bothers me, but I really, really wanted him to throw down the hammer on this case, and so I was willing to give an exception, but he didn't get it. So. But I think the rest of the races at the state level, Commissioner of Agriculture, Insurance, Labor, all of those, I think those were pretty much as expected. What I did think was interesting, we kind of talked about Gary Black a little bit and his high vote count and school superintendent. Like, it's just crazy that those races had not only the highest Republican vote totals, but also the greatest margin between the Democrat.
Right.
And I just thought that was interesting. I guess school makes a little bit more sense because Richard Woods has kind of flown under the radar. Like, he hasn't had any scandals. Most everything gets passed off to the locals as long as he's basically just like the go-between between the feds and the locals, and then making sure that they're adhering to curriculum. But it was just interesting that the biggest differences between percentage points were those two races.
Yeah, there is. Wow. Huh.
And of course, our boy Ryan Graham, Libertarian for Public Service Commissioner, forced a runoff between Chuck Eaton and Lindy Miller. Ryan got 2.66% of the vote, or 102,000 votes. Which, of course, he and John Turpish, I believe, who was the other Public Service Commission candidate, they got enough votes to stay for ballot access, which is good.
Right.
I think the most important reason to run for Public Service Commission is to stay on the ballot. But going into the legislature, I think, is where we saw some crazy flips, and I think a little bit more domination of the Democrats. A bigger blue wave at the state level was in the legislature versus the constitutional offices.
Right.
Did you lose any seats in your area?
Nope. No. Paulding was like it was ridiculous. Like, just across the board, every Republican candidate picked up, 80 some odd % of the vote.
Wow.
With the exception of Joseph Gullett, who House District 19, which is where I live, is the eastern portion of the county, and easily the most diverse. And he was in the mid 60s, and his Democratic challenger was in the mid 40s, I believe.
Allison, who actually
was on the show,
featured on our show.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think that has anything to? I understand it's diverse, and obviously demographics have a huge part of it. But do you think there was any credit or give any credence to it being an open seat? I feel like that has an impact.
Yeah, but also the county's Democratic Party was very active this year, and they haven't been in the past. I think that they would have done the same had Paulette been on the ticket, because they saw a weakness in that seat.
That makes sense. I just, the legislature, the seats that were lost in Gwinnett, Fulton, I think a couple in DeKalb and even Cobb, some of them were open seats. Some of them were incumbents, which was, I think, a surprise to a lot of people. But it seemed like, Brad Raffensperger, he's from Johns Creek, and it wasn't a special election. It's a very conservative area. It has all of the markers for a Republican district, and it went blue by a very, very small margin. So I think it could easily flip back in 2 years. But I think that was a surprise. And then down in Buckhead, where I used to live when I was in Atlanta, where Wendell Willard served, and Beth Beskin, Megan Hansen, all these reps. And there was a seat. Wendell Willard's seat was an open seat, and it flipped blue. And I think that I think there are people who are Democrats who vote for some of these moderate people knowing that they know them or they work with them or they've known them in the community forever. So then once they leave and there's a vacated seat in a moderate district, they're like, oh, you know what? We're going to vote our values now instead of our friend.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of what happened with the open seats. I think, they lost the super majority in the legislature, which, again, is a good thing. But I'm very interested to see how our lawmakers act under a Kemp governorship, because he is far more conservative than Deal, far more conservative than Ralston. But if he knows his role as the governor, he'll kind of stay away from the legislature. So
right.
I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. But the good news is that Kemp is actually comes from a Republican background. He's not a former Democrat.
Right.
And he's not Casey Cagle, who lost in 157 of 159 counties. So, any day that you're not Casey Cagle is a good day.
It's a good day, right? Yeah. Man, I am sad that Megan Hansen lost.
I'm sorry you're sad. So moving on.
Right.
Let's move on to the amendments. I'm going to start the timer. Hold on. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to talk about how happy you are that Amendment 1 passed. And when the timer goes off, I don't ever want to hear about it again. So go ahead. I've started the clock.
I'm happy it passed. And, though, I will say this. I was spot on with my percentage prediction. When I said, because I was like, that one's going to go 80%. And y'all were like, no. And it did. It's almost 83%, I think.
83%, huh?
Yep. 83%. Is that what? That's it. I don't have to say anything.
That is the end. That is the death of Amendment 1. It passed, but for this show's purposes, it is dead.
Till my closing thoughts.
Ugh. Gosh almighty. I'm Amendment 1'd out. But I think we had this conversation with Dave in our little chat group, but kind of talking about how the percentages seem overwhelming for all the amendments. The percentages seem overwhelmingly huge, but then when you actually look at the raw numbers, going down to Marcy's law, it's wild that it's 80.9% voted in favor, so 19.10% voted against it, but that's only 721,000 people. Only 721,000 people were able to look at something and be like,
Right.
I don't know. I was really disappointed, and of course I was disappointed about these. This is I cared more about the amendments than the candidates, because I feel like candidates, people, they try to go for a feeling or they try to go for a value alignment, and these weren't feelings. That's why Marcy's law passed the way that it did, but these aren't feelings. These are actual constitutional amendments that affect our lives. But the thing that was just wild to me is, what the hell was everyone so mad about with Constitutional Amendment 3 for the timber tax? Because it got 37.8% no. 1.3 million people. More people voted against a timber tax classification than anything. And I want to be like, you people in Atlanta don't even know what timber is.
You know what it is, though? It's exactly what I said. They looked at it, they tried to read it, they went, that doesn't make any damn sense. Someone's trying to pull something over on me. No.
And I agree with you, and I think that I agree with you, except that number 2, which was the business court, got 31% no, and that was arguably one of the easiest to understand. I mean, that was simpler wording and more positive language than your Amendment 1. I mean, the language was create a statewide business court to lower costs, enhance efficiency, and promote predictable judicial outcomes. That sounds beautiful. And that was just a tick behind Amendment 3.
Right.
So if they don't understand it, I thought 5 about the tax districts. I mean, that was a difficult one to understand. People just disappoint me. It's so dang disappointing. I gave you a hard time about Amendment 1, but I always said it was the least worst. Like, I just wanted it to have more teeth. That was my problem with it all along.
Right.
And I wanted it to be stronger if you're going to make it a constitutional thing. But all of these other ones, like, they're going to have massive repercussions. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a story going around on Marcy's Law, I think from Kentucky or Kansas. Don't quote me on the state, but basically what happened was Marcy's Law was enacted, and they had an incident where a homeowner shot an intruder in their home in the middle of the night, and the intruder survived. So the intruder became the victim and enacted Marcy's Law and claimed all the rights of a victim and was able to influence the process all along, bring charges, be part of, the magistrate hearings, and be there for the preliminary trial stuff, and to testify in front of the grand jury as the victim when this person was trespassing and going to do Lord knows what. But because of Marcy's Law, the defense attorney totally turned the tables and made this person who broke into someone's house and was shot the victim. And it was codified and protected under the Constitution.
Right.
That's the kind of crap that people approved.
So, what's the process in this state for removing a constitutional amendment?
I believe it has to go back on the ballot. Because Montana wanted to repeal it, and they were talking about putting it on the ballot. They wanted to repeal it because I think it added like $600,000 to various county budgets across the state for implementation. And my thing was just, we're beating a dead horse here, but the groups that were against it, what was telling, I mean, you never hear law enforcement, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and judges all saying the same thing. And they were this time. And I'm worried about the repercussions, but it's just like the stripper tax. That happened 2 years ago. We've never heard another thing about it. The world keeps turning. The businesses, just keep doing what they're doing. But people are affected by it, and it's impacted our state. But we don't talk about it anymore because it's a constitutional amendment. And so now it's like not cool to be against the Constitution, because that's why we amend it, so people can say, well, are you against constitutional rights?
Right.
It's just disappointing.
I don't know. Did you watch any races outside of Georgia?
I watched Ted Cruz, which was interesting, and his opponent dropped an F-bomb in his concession speech. Did you see that?
I heard about it.
Yeah. And then I watched the Florida governor's race, which is interesting because at the time of recording this, now they're saying that like there's a closer margin and there might be a recount. But I mean, I said it before, like I'm not a huge national politics person because look how ticked off I am about how little influence we were able to have on this stuff, and that's even worse. So I just get discouraged. But did you?
Yeah, I watched. There's a Senate race. It's funny, oddly enough, out of Montana that I was watching. John Tester and Matt Rosendale. Matt Rosendale is a Republican, and one of the things that you have to understand about some of these western states, especially like Montana, is a Democrat in Montana is like a Republican everywhere else, right? But Rosendale, well, let me back that up. Tester is a huge public lands guy, and Rosendale adopted the position that he was, but then he had Mike Lee running around all over the state stumping for him. So I think it hurt him, but that was a close race there. Tester only came out of that at 50.1%. Like the margin there was about 15,000 votes, which, by the way, was almost the exact count of the Libertarian.
I would love to be present in like in a mega county, not just because we can go be I mean, you can go to the Board of Elections where I am and sit there while they count everything. But I would love to be somewhere where there's hundreds of thousands of votes and just chaos and watch how they try to do this. Because, as of Thursday evening, they were still counting votes in Arizona. And I think that's kind of hard to comprehend because we all have electronic voting machines and this is 2018. And why didn't they start counting the absentees right after? And it's just the uncertainty of our elections, and as they get closer and closer, the margins between Republicans and Democrats as we become like a more divisive country, I think that people are going to start demanding results like even faster.
Right. And
I wonder what role absentee will have in holding that up because, and provisional, I mean, for a lot of people, they don't know that provisional ballots are what you show up to the polls, you're at the wrong place, you're not registered correctly, you don't have the right kind of ID. They let you cast a ballot anyway, and then they verify later on that, yours is a valid ballot to be cast. But that's a slow process. That slows a lot of stuff down. And I just wonder how the society of instant gratification coupled with divisive chanting in the streets, our guy won, how that's going to play out over the next several years when we want answers faster.
Right. And we talked a little bit about this before. I think they should do away with provisional ballots altogether.
I agree.
Look, from right now till the next election of some kind, you've got 2 years. Get it together. If you want to vote, get your affairs in order for that. Get off welfare. Go pay your taxes. Get a job. Own some property. Something like that. Go register properly. And have it together for when you show up. I don't know. Provisional ballots to me are stupid.
Well, and you bring up a good point about, you had time to get your stuff together and this, that, and the other. And this is another beaten horse that the phrase people are tired of hearing. But voter suppression, 61.16% of registered voters in Georgia turned out to vote. So 6.4 million people are registered to vote. 3.9 million of them turned out to vote. And, everyone's like, but we have 10 million Georgians. Okay, well, some of those are kids, and some of those people just don't care to vote. We're never going to have 100% turnout. And my thing is 61%, I thought that was outstanding.
Right.
Because one, voters are dumb, and two, because normally, you look at an election and it's 25 or 30% and people are cheering and so happy. So I thought 61% was great. And it goes along with what you're saying, you have all this time to register. First of all, you don't have to wait until it's election season to register. You can go register today for 2020.
Right.
Or tomorrow, or you can go online. There's no window. It's just there's a push for it, and you're drawing attention to it, and then suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, I didn't get to register." Well, that sounds like a personal problem.
Right. I don't know. I think I disagree some with the voter suppression stuff that I was saying. I saw a friend of mine was saying that we had 4 million people voted. There were some places that the polls stayed open till 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm. So for the people who don't know why it stayed up until 10, in Gwinnett County, the machines weren't working at a couple precincts. Legitimately, none of the machines were working. There were lines 300 people deep. They were waiting for 2 and 3 hours. So a judge ordered them to stay open later. Well, and then of course Kemp got blamed, which I'm pretty sure you have a board of elections that's supposed to get everything set up the night before and test it. I don't know how it wasn't working, but I just don't understand why it's instantly his fault. But, Stacey Abrams has said in recent days that they plan to sue Kemp and Deal over the fact that Southwest Georgia counties didn't get extra time to turn in votes because of the hurricane. Well, the hurricane hit right at the start of early voting. They extended the voter registration deadline for them. Then they had 3 weeks, just like everyone else, and they had election day. Like, the people who wanted to vote, who, if they don't still have power and wanted to vote, probably voted no matter what.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. How long do you need to get your act together?
Right. And I've said I'm totally against early voting because it opens the door of it's never going to be long enough. I mean, what do you want? Like, as soon as someone announces you can start voting for them? Like, it's ridiculous. I understand that it would have been very difficult to tolerate 3.9 million voters on election day. I understand that would have been a nightmare. And it is what it is at this point, and it's how our system is. But if you can't find a time in a 3-week period, an extra Saturday or election day or a mail-in ballot, if you can't get to the polls or have your voice heard, you're not going to do it.
Right.
And because you're not going to do it does not mean that you're being suppressed or your voice is being silenced. I mean, the Abrams campaign sent out an email on Thursday saying that by Kemp declaring his victory while the provisionals were still being validated and verified, he was stealing their voice.
Right. But isn't that like the numbers, just the math doesn't work for her at this point?
It doesn't. But she's saying that she will take a runoff, she'll take a recount, they're going to fight it, and they announced this ballot chasing initiative. Like, if you didn't get your ballot sent off, or you can't track down your ballot, or you had trouble provisionally voting, like, we're not talking about 4,000 or 5,000 votes here. We're talking about 60. And that's on the presumption that she's going to get all 60,000, which is statistically impossible unless you find a box labeled Stacey Abrams that were put together on Wednesday.
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't work.
Have you seen the calls for the Libertarian Party to be billed for the runoffs?
What?
Yep.
Who's doing that?
That happened here in Palm.
Who did that?
Oh, they weren't elected officials. These were other people, it's like random citizens that are like
yeah, tell us their names.
Tim Thompson.
Who the hell is he?
He's one of the guys that is quickly becoming a staple within Palm politics.
Hey, Tim. I'm not going to put my phone number on the show, but I'd like to talk to you, so reach out. I'd like to have you on the show, Tim.
He probably would.
Let's talk about these ideas you have. Tim. So, if you could... Why are you laughing?
Well, because I have the benefit that the listeners don't of seeing your face on camera.
So, if you could sum up the election in one word, what would it be?
Oh.
One word.
This go around, tedious. What's your word?
Well, I can't come up with just one word, but I made the rules, so I'm going to give myself an exception, but it would be more of the same. Like, it just is. It's just repetitive. It's redundant. I feel like I'm excited. I honestly am genuinely excited that Kemp beat Abrams. Like, I'm happy about that.
Right.
I'm almost indifferent to everybody else because I feel like nothing is going to change. But I don't know. The special session is going to give us an interesting podcast for sure.
Yeah, it will. When does that start? 5 days?
Yeah. Well, November 13th.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. It's Thursday.
Thursday, November 8th.
Oh, gosh. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, Amendment 1 passed. I'm pretty happy about that. No, I don't. I'm ready for politics to be over for a little bit. I'm happy about that. I'm gonna go spend some time in the woods with my kids. Then we're gonna do the Christmas stuff. So,
are you still gonna start an outdoor podcast?
No, I don't think so. I thought about it, and the more I think about it, the more I'm not going to.
We have so much fun with this one that we never want to do another podcast with anyone ever, anywhere, about anything.
No, what it is even though, like, the one that I was thinking about doing would be very, very original, the podcast market in outdoor stuff like that is just full.
Mm-hmm.
So
that makes sense. Well, you can just chime in weekly with a little tidbit for us here.
Right.
Yes. So
what are you gonna do?
What am I gonna do? Like with life or what? My life plans. Well, I'm just trying to get to the weekend. It's just one day at a time. 30's been tough. I'm not kidding. Like, I've really struggled with 30.
Really?
I spoke at Georgia Southern like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
About the Brooklet thing. And at the end, they opened up and asked all these questions. And most of them were about, like, the case. But a couple asked, like, what I studied or where, how I got involved in writing or whatever. And one person was like, how old are you? And I, like, it hurt to say it off my lips to say 30. Because I haven't really had to say it to anyone. Like, people who have said it to me know how old I am and are teasing me or making a joke or something. But I haven't actually had to say, I'm 30 years old. And, I mean, and then it was like some young kid. And he's like, oh, wow, you look good for 30. And I wanted to be like, I mean, like, what do you think? 30 is not 50. 30 is 30. It's 10 years after 20. It's 5 years after 25. And you look good at 25. Like, I was mortified. And I was just like...
Shut up, punk.
Yeah, this kid needs an F. Like, it was rough. It was a rough night. So...
Oh, did you film that part?
I think it's on camera.
God, I'm gonna have to go find that.
Sure. I'm pretty sure it is. But yeah. You look good for 30. I was like, I mean,
what'd you say to me?
Yeah. Grab him by the collar.
Right.
You got something to say? Ugh. So with that, next week Dave will be back. Don't know what we'll be talking about, but I mean, I'm sure the legislative session will be part of it. But
right.
If you have any ideas, tell us on Facebook or message one of us. Or, well, this is why Dave is here, because he says all this stuff at all the right times. Just so you know, everything we said was our opinions and not that of all of Georgia. So signing off. Have a good week.
Later.